Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Astros Baseball. Wally's joining me today, and we also have a very special guest, one of my favorite guests of all time that comes on the show, former Astros broadcaster and author of Astros Legend, Greg Lucus. Mr. Lucas, how are you?
I'm fine. I think all the stuff that's in the pages of my book may be legends, but I'm just an old retired announcer.
Oh, you're a legend. It says it. If you Google Greg Lucas, it says legend. You're a legend.
We
Well, that's
appreciate you
great.
joining in on a
Well, I'm
Thanksgiving
always
morning.
fun to talk. It's always great to talk about the Astros past and present because I still follow them.
So today we'll cover a little bit about this past season, what's going on now, and then we'll get into your book, Astros Legends. It's a revised copy. The
Second
first
edition.
one went all the way to 2017, and now it has 2018 to 23. So there's a lot of more new juicy stuff in there.
There's probably 30 or maybe 40 more pages. There is things updated from that period. And of course, that period included the second World Series win and a couple of World Series not wins, but some great years and some great moments. So yeah, that's there's a lot in it, and the main things from the original were there too. They're still there.
So, what was your thought on this past season, 2024? Me and Wally talked about it all season. It's like, I don't think this is the year. And then they caught fire, and Detroit just took care of them easily. So, what were your
Well, and
overall thoughts?
the Detroit series was sort of a microcosm of why people weren't sure all year that they were going to be able to do it because they ran into these stretches where they didn't get clutch hits. Uh, because statistically, that's where statistics can lie a little bit because the Astros actually had one of the top team batting averages in baseball. But when it mattered, they weren't so good. And you can do that easily. If you lead off an inning with a couple of hits and then don't ever get a third, you're not going to score any runs. Or if two outs and then you get a couple of hits and you can't get a third, you're not going to score any runs. But the team batting average is going to go up. And that was a pattern that we saw so much with the Astros this year. They just couldn't get the hits often enough to drive in enough of those runs. And then well, they have great, well pitched games, and they weren't getting any support. And occasionally they'd have a game that wasn't as well pitched, and then actually make a comeback, but it would fall just a little bit short. So it just you saw that so often. It was often like, oh, here we go again, and that's what happened. Here we went again.
Yeah, it was something we noticed pretty early on. I'd get your comments on is that the plate discipline or the selectiveness had really gone away.
Yes, several players had pretty high strikeout totals that were not normal. In fact, even Bregman. Bregman had a slow start, but then he came on well the second half of the season. But he didn't walk nearly as much. He struck out more than he used to, and he was just an example because everyone was. Uh, Jordan was, swinging at pitches that he shouldn't with counts that were in his favor. They all had that problem at one time or another. Jose Altuve struck out more in a single season than he ever has. And part of that was the same thing. Now, plate discipline has never been one of his great uh, pluses, but he's usually been able to overcome it by hitting the ball anyway. And he missed a few more this year. And so it was, and some guys were just predictable. If you throw them this, they're going to get him. And that's what they threw, and they got him. And so, yeah, there were a lot of guys that were not able to lay off a lot of bad pitches, and it all added up. I think I rest it more on the offense than anywhere else, even though, as I said, they had one of the top batting averages in the league. I just think that they just weren't productive as they needed to be by a long shot.
Didn't it look like this year they got themselves out more than any season you've seen in a long time?
I do think that's kind of a symptom of what we're talking about. The count's good, and they don't take advantage of it, and that means sometimes you take some pitches. And also, there were times when you looked at him and you say, you're watching at home and you say, this guy's been throwing that fastball in the outside corner to Jordan. He's going to keep looking at that outside corner with that fastball. And if Jordan doesn't adjust and start hitting the ball the other way, he's going to get him out with that fastball in the outside corner. And I'm picking on one of the better hitters here. But it applied for almost everybody. Um, Pena improved a great deal against the slider and the breaking ball most of the season, but there were key times in games where you knew it was coming, and it came, and he didn't hit it. So, it's a situation where you have to not just outthink the pitcher, but you also have to really be basic quality see ball, hit ball. In other words, no, it doesn't have to be my perfect swing, but my hands have to get to the ball. And too many times they didn't, and resulted in a lot more strikeouts.
Yeah, that was one of the issues we saw. I mean, you just touched on it. LOB. They left so many people on base. There was, we would cover the games, and it's like, okay, they won 1 out of 3, but they could have won all 3 of them if they would have just drove the guys in when they had a chance. And you made a great point. The batting average was high, but the LOB was high also, and that's not a good combination.
No, it's a terrible combination. And they at some points they had to overwork some of the pitchers a little bit. And they were also trying to be very careful with the young guys, and so sometimes they had to go with guys that and the other factor, and this is partly because of the young guys, they didn't have people that pitched enough innings. The starting pitchers I'm sorry, I know that's a trend in all of baseball right now, but you've got to break it somehow. You've got to have some of your starting pitchers, maybe not all of them, but you've got to have some of your starting pitchers be capable of going much deeper in the game and not having 100 pitches after 5. And that's something that has to be improved. No question about it. That's pretty much every pitcher in the staff. The veteran pitchers did better in that, but still they've got to figure out how to get through innings with fewer pitches.
You remember when Durker came in and the first thing he said is he wanted his starting pitchers to go 7?
Yep. And he had to change his mind, but he went longer than they do nowadays. He got them to go longer because he had Oswald. Oswald could go along, and he had some guys, some veteran guys. But now the young guys are not being taught. They're in the minor leagues, and they're babying them to a degree. And I understand why, because of the prevalence of arm injuries and surgeries. And I know why, but still, it's not working as well as it needs to.
I see a lot of people post things about Nolan Ryan, about he threw 300 pitches, and then 2 days later he threw like another 198. I saved one of these screenshots, and this has nothing to do with how many pitches he threw, but he had 198 non-win quality starts, and that's you got to go 6 innings, right? 198. Yeah. He was 0-107 with a 2.27 ERA.
He would be, if he had played more years with better hitting teams, because he was in California and they had no hitters. Yeah. And when he was with the Astros didn't have very many hitters. And so consequently, he had some seasons that didn't match his win-loss record. He would have probably won another 100 games if he'd played with teams that had a little more potent bats. And then there would be no question whether or not he's number 1 or number 2 in the world all time. We know that he is in strikeouts, and we know he is in no hitters, but he might have been considered even higher in everything else.
Don't forget 1 hitters, 2 hitters, and 3 hitters too.
Yeah,
was it 19 1 hitters? I think
something like some obnoxious number. Yeah, there's 35 2 hitters, 53 hitters, something like that.
Earlier Wally brought up. I just lost his name. The old Larry Durker. He brought up Larry Durker. Yeah. What do you think about the job Joe Espada did?
I think from the circumstance that he was under, I think he did fine. I mean, consider the number of injuries he had to deal with, the number of young players from the minor leagues that he had to give playing time to, the fact that one veteran just was done at first base. He was done. And then Bregman was hurt at the beginning. He missed some games, and then he didn't hit at all. And Jordan even missed some time. And that's not even counting the pitchers. He was forced to use some young guys that maybe no one was figuring on being as important as they turned out to be, but they did. And now the question is, Will they be able to go up from there? Because the Astros definitely need those young guys to make it even more of a improvement to have 2025 be a successful year. But I thought he did okay. I mean, you can second guess individual moves here and there all the time, but I think in the big picture, I had no problem with him. I think they did miss a guy like Dusty with his veteran and experience and all that sort of stuff. But Joe's been around, and he'd been around this team. He knew the players, and he knew how Dusty managed, and so I'm sure he picked some things from his brain. So I thought from that standpoint, he was fine.
Got anything, Wally?
No, I mean, I think we talked about Espada a lot. I think, get your feedback on this. I get a bunch of people who said he stunk, and I said, well, bad managers take 7-19 and turn it into 12-36 or something like that. It sure seemed like the team had a lot of faith in him, didn't you think?
No, I don't think the players had any problems. I mean, as I said, they got back in the race, and they won the division again. I mean, the record was well under what it has been in the past. They won the division again, and nobody really thought they were going to have much success in the postseason. Now, they didn't think they were going to lose 2 straight to Detroit, but they didn't think they were going to have much success in the postseason. And the fact that they lost 2 games at home, what else is new? They have not done so well at home in several years.
They were actually better at home this year.
Yeah. This year they were better, much better this year. But
2019 says hello, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about the job by Dana Brown? How do you think he's doing?
A hard call, because you never know how much he is restrained, and I think he's restrained quite a bit by budgetary concerns. Jim Crane is willing to spend, but he's not willing to go crazy. Yeah. And that's that. For instance, the offer that they made to Correa years ago was better than Correa ended up getting, but it wasn't what he and his agent wanted. So they go to this, rollover type contract situation, and his offer to and I'm not talking about the qualifying offer, that doesn't count. The offer that they're going to make to Bregman is not going to be a bad offer, but someone else may offer more, and that will be the difference. But the offer, in other words, he's not cheap. He is more, and I wouldn't even call him necessarily frugal, because they did had to get into the tax salary deal, but he's cautious. He's much more cautious. He's not just going to say, hey, we need this guy. He's a team leader. Yeah, he's 260 and 25 homers, and he got off to a bad start, but he's the greatest defensive third baseman at third. The question is, how long? And that's the problem. How long? And if he gets somebody give him 6 or 7 or 8 years, Astros would actually be stupid to do that.
Yeah.
But fans won't accept that, because they'll say, wait a minute, we don't have a guy to replace Correa like we ended up with Pena that we know of in the minor leagues right now. So it's going to be a tough call, but maybe his loyalty to here, and maybe someone will point out that if you go to some of these states, your taxes are going to eat up a lot of that extra money you're making. And you're going to have to start from scratch with new teammates and all that sort of stuff. But I don't know. Money talks more than those things do.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like they've put together what you hear on, what's rumored is seems to be a pretty decent base to start from. It probably goes up, but
I agree. I think, and you can throw in all sorts of incentives in his older years. I mean, the problem is you're going to find some team that's not going to worry about that. They're going to say, right, okay, we'll pay. Well, just what the Dodgers did with Ohtani. He's getting almost all that money after he retires. Now, you think that's not going to have an effect on the Dodgers in whatever, 10 years or whatever it is when he retires? Not going to bother them all now. They can just keep. But in 10 years, you start collecting guys that are taking all the money after they're retired. And that's especially at that level, that's going to affect them. But maybe they'll win 5 World Series in the meantime, and they'll say, okay.
Yeah.
What do you think Bregman's going to get anything close to this 11-year deal?
No.
That is that Boris wants? Because
I can't believe it. He's past the age of 30, and no, I can't believe. Look, Pujols should have been the greatest example.
Yep.
Pujols had all of his great years before he went to California. They had, he was good, still good,
Mhm.
but he no longer could play a position because he was getting slow. And when he was with the Cardinals, he could play a position. Well, he had to because the DH hadn't existed in the National League yet. But and in the end, he was just a kind of an average hitter. He was better above average. He had some power, but he wasn't Pujols. When Pujols was a Cardinal, he was great. But the Cardinals made that same judgment. We can't afford to have you around when you're 42
Mm-mm.
years old.
Yeah.
And they were right. Now, have they won since? No. But they have a better chance of rebuilding because they aren't saddled with all those extra dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think? Order of magnitude, what do you think Bregman finally ends up with, and do you think he comes back?
Well, if they can keep it in the 150 million multi-year deal, then he could come back. But we're hearing all sorts of numbers. Can will Detroit want to pay more than that? Yankees can if they want to.
Yeah.
I kind of like the guy they had playing third base this year. That left-handed hitting hit a few home runs. And the Yankees are quick to go after names. But on the other hand, the Yankees are also worried about the image because he was part of the dreaded Astros. And, they boo him. They always did.
They won't.
Well, they wouldn't if he's on their team. Maybe not. But I don't know. I think in his case, he's got to really make it be the right fit if he leaves. I'm
Yeah.
not sure what's the right fit. Um,
They
it
have
can't be
Bregman.
just
They have Bregman listed as part of the Plan B for the Yankees if they don't get Soto. So I mean, I don't know where they got that from, but it looks like the Yankees do want him as at least a Plan B.
well, and indications are they're not going to get Soto based on everything I read. The Mets may get him before the Yankees, but he's also much younger. I mean, Soto, if you want to
Yeah.
give a 10-year contract to, fine. What's
Yeah.
he, 26?
Something like that. 25, 26.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
If you want, because he didn't even get up to his prime yet,
He's
and he's
25.
played. Yeah, okay. Well, then
Wow.
but 30, 31, you don't go do 10 years. 5 years would be the absolute max because I'm at this deal where I look at 35, 36, and nowadays, ever since PEDs were banned, we don't see people past 35 or 36 performing
Mm-mm.
like they did during the PED era.
Yeah.
And this is back the way they performed before there were PEDs, which means 35, 36, you're going to see a downturn. And that would be my way of thinking if I was the owner. And I'm not even looking at dollars. I'm just looking at when he's 36 or 37, is he going to really be our best guy at third base or wherever, DH, or will he really be? And
No.
not likely, because bringing guys up from the minors is always chancy and risky. The Astros took a look at a lot of players, and none of them really were outstanding. There's none of them that said, "Oh, he's the guy." Now, one of them may have to become the guy, and maybe will be the guy, but we don't know that from what we've seen from the young guys that got a shot last year.
Yeah.
One guy they keep on team that's come up lately is the Phillies for Bregman, which could be a fit, but I just, for the life of me, I can't see why they're so quick to want to get rid of Alec Boehm. He seems like an up and coming player that, given the money you'd have to pay for Bregman, it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, especially since the Phillies they draw fans. Their fans are there. They don't need a draw. I mean, because Bregman's not going to come in and be he did it once, but he's not going to come in and be a 40, 45 home run guy. He's going to be about what he was this year. Batting average may be a little bit higher, but he's 25 to 30 home runs in a good year for him. Great fielder, great defender, and he's a great team leader. But of course, he'd be going to a totally new team that already has leaders, so he'd have to fit that in. But the Phillies actually would be a good possibility for him if everything else was equal. As I say, $160 million contract there is a lot less than $160 million contract here or in Florida. or in even Arizona, where the taxes are not so great. But that would be his call and his agent's call.
So you're saying the Marlins are a chance?
Well, I don't know they are, and I don't know about Tampa Bay. They may not be in Tampa very long. They may be in New Orleans. They may be in not New Orleans. Well, New Orleans maybe, but they may be some other city.
They go to Charlotte.
Yeah. I also think Bregman is going to want a big paycheck, but I don't think he's going to want a big paycheck from a team that's not going to win because he's too used to winning.
I agree, and that's why. Okay, then you've got the Yankees, then you've got the Dodgers, and you've got the
Mets,
the Giants, maybe, and you got Seattle. Seattle apparently is interested in looking into him because they do need offense because they have very impressive pitching. But how quickly can that happen? How quickly can you turn it? Don't know.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's take a quick break and we come back. Let's get into this book, this revision of Astros Legend by our Astros legend, Greg Lucus. We'll be right back, folks, with more Astros baseball. All right, folks, we are back with more Greg Lucus. Wally is also here. Okay, you wrote this book, Astros Legends. When did the first one come out?
This part here says updated through 2024. I wrote that in. This is my reference copy, and there are hardly any updates because what happened was the first book came out in 2018, and that got us through the World Series of 2017. And this book picks up from there through 2023. It came out originally late in the summer, which was unfortunate. The publisher saying, "Hey, remember, Christmas is coming, and this is still available in the stands in many Barnes and Nobles, and it can be ordered through Barnes and Nobles or the usual spots, Amazon and so on and so forth. It can be ordered. But if you go into a Barnes and Noble in this part of the state, you might find it because they have it. But if you don't find it, then you can alleviate having to deal with the internet yourself by just going to the desk and having them order it, and it'll come to their store." But it's Astros Legends. It is an updated version of a book the first book. It's got about 30 or 40 extra pages, more pages, and it's got things from the seasons of 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23. And those are pretty good years. It's got the updated no-hitter lists. It's got the Altuve going up the list and some of the things, the pitching records, and some of the great stories. The one I am the most proud of, and this is the one the publisher definitely wanted me to do, I think it's chapter 20. It's the one about the scandal and the sign stealing scandal. And this has a very detailed and I believe accurate assessment of what happened, how it worked, that it was only for home games, and that it ended in early September when the Chicago White Sox, of all people, got suspicious. And I'll tell you a little bit on that story because there was a gentleman in Houston who's a member of the local Sabre chapter who had taped every single home game, every single one he had on tape or DVR. And he went back when the scandal came out and he started listening to his old tapes. And he little clipboard and started checking things. He took account of every time bang, bang, bang was heard from the bench, the beating of the trash can. How many? He has the total number of times. He has the total number of at bats, the total number of pitches that were involved, and he can even tell you which guys paid attention or at least heard them, and which guys didn't. And he verifies that Altuve shut him up. He told him, "I don't want to hear that when I'm at bat," and you didn't hear him when Altuve was at bat. But he also pointed out exactly when it ended. Now, the Astros had contended forever that it was never used in postseason. And that's why it kind of miffed them when people said, well, they beat the Dodgers in the World Series. That's why they beat the Yankees. And they weren't using it. And they weren't using it for a rather factual reason. They said when they used it at home and the crowd was large, even during the regular season, it was sometimes very hard to hear. And the World Series would have been even worse. But they
Yeah.
also didn't use it because the White Sox had tipped off people after they decided that it was basically time to change signs. Simple thing, changing signs. When this thing came out originally, I had a conversation with Larry Durker, and Durker said, this sort of thing has amazed me because all you have to do is change signs. And they won't know whether one's a fastball or two's a curve or what combination is what because you change them. And you can change them more than once in the single game if you want to. And but hardly anybody ever does that. And they are always looking for people stealing them from second base with the base runner and all that sort of stuff. Well, that's legal, first of all. And secondly, that's not the only way you steal signs. This chapter has a history of it, and even electronic sign stealing, which actually was first done in the 1890s. And it happened again later. And, so it's not something that the Astros invented. It's something that they simply used. And as we were talking before the show, the interesting part is during the season in question, 2017, the Astros actually had better hitting records and batting records and on the road than they did at home. And on the road, you couldn't use it because you didn't have access to your own TV camera in center field. And so they didn't use that system anywhere but Minute Maid Park. And it might have even hurt them because they actually hit less at Minute Maid Park during that year. But that's my favorite chapter. But we also have several other chapters that some were carried over and updated from the original book. And as I said, we've got a lot of extra stuff in the book. We've got some stories on some of the greats of the past that a lot of people have totally forgotten, like Don Wilson. A guy threw 2 no-hitters and had an early death, and questions about his death. We have some of the records that were broken by players that we all remember, the Biggios and the Bagwells, and some of the other instances of great games. Jordan's great game when he won the series basically against the Phillies with his home run. That's in there in great detail. A lot of quotes from the people that were involved. And it's really worth something that every Astro fan should have in their bookshelf, but more importantly, they should read first. Yeah. And it's called Astros Legends. It is the second edition. That's the important thing. I mentioned that because the first one still can be found on some of the order sites too. And you want to make sure you get the second one if you already have the first one.
Yeah.
And second edition. This one has no players on the front. The other one has a couple of Astro players on the front. This one has no players on the front, but there are plenty of pictures inside, and it's easy read. It's one of those things where you read a chapter today and then set it aside. And one place people might set it aside is where people set it aside with books like that, and a little bit at a time.
That's where I would read it.
Yeah, but you'll get through it, and it only takes a little bit of time to do it. But I do advocate it, certainly. And it's done by a company called Blue River Press. It's part of the Cardinal Publishing Group. Those are names to remember if you have to look it up on Amazon. But it's easy to find. I've double checked, and just you can put my name down and author, and books will show up, and the books that I've written. So I advocate it even if I hadn't written it, because it was an idea of the publisher to do an update, and I think he was definitely right. The thing about it is it's almost evergreen. At least it's evergreen for a while, because other than the no-hitter early in the season, there's really nothing that would have been added from the 2024 season as a legend. It was that's the sad part.
Yeah.
But hopefully there will be new ones coming up starting in 2025, but it may be an uphill climb.
Yeah, one of my favorite legends, I have not read your book, but I will. I say the best right-hander I've ever seen is J.R. Richard.
Well, JR's in here.
Tell me a little bit about JR, because we saw him as a fan. Any good stories? Because we all know about the All-Star game, but
well, he basically, the records that he set, striking over 300 in a season a couple of times, and the fact that it took him a while. If I want to compare him to anyone, I compare him a little bit to Randy Johnson in the sense that it took Randy a little while to get the command. He always had the hard fastball, but once he got his command, he was unhittable, just like JR was once he got his command. So they both were getting their command. And JR was right around 30 when he had the stroke, but he was right in the prime. And he would have given you at least 5 more years of top flight pitching, and would have been a Hall of Famer. But the stroke cut him short, and he never could come back from it, and that was unfortunate because he missed the huge dollar years. Although he did get a boost after they signed Ryan, he got some incentive clauses added to his contract because Ryan was getting so much money, $1 million a year, and that was unheard of at the time.
Yeah.
And he got some incentive money, which helped him make up some of that. But no, he was, the players that he played against, they said he was just, you don't want to face J.R. Richard. I mean, he threw the ball. He was just, and that was really before we had radar guns. And so we don't know exactly. It's sort of like the legends of Satchel Paige. We don't know really how hard he threw,
Yeah.
but we do know that compared to the other guys that he was throwing against and with, he was on the top, and that was J.R. Richard.
And he threw that slider out of that same tunnel, and you just had to pick one and hope you hit it. We had friends, we laugh in college was about that time. It said the other teams would get J. arthritis.
Well, that happened. There were guys all of a sudden, I think I'll take a day off. And players didn't take day offs like they do now, but they did.
Yeah.
They did when it was JR's turn to pitch, and they were right-handed hitters especially. But that was the thing about JR. He had the slider. Ryan, to compare him to Ryan developed his curveball. He never really had a slider. He developed his curveball really when he was in Anaheim, and the pitch that really set him apart as he got older was his changeup.
Yep.
Because his changeup was thrown so hard, it actually moved like a screwball. If you ever look at some of the old videos of Nolan and he throws the changeup, it'll dart into right-handed hitters a little bit and away from lefties because it had a little bit of screwball on it because he used what they called a circle change, and it came off like this. Came off the hand like this, and that automatically made it have a little bit of spin in the opposite direction. And of course, it also wasn't very changey. I mean, he threw his fastball 95, his changeup might have been 90, but that's the pitch that really set him apart in his final years until his arm finally fell apart that night in Seattle.
And Dan Wilson hits a grand slam to end his career.
Yeah, the last guy I actually faced was Magadan because Magadan was the next hitter, and he got behind him like 3-0, and he called it mound because his ulnar collateral ligament has finally snapped. It had been hanging on by a thread during his years in Houston, and that's why Dick Wagner, and that's in here too, actually. That's why Dick Wagner put a pitch count on him, which he hated. And then when he went up to Texas, he made sure they didn't put a pitch count on him. He says, "I'm going to pitch till it goes." He had some injuries, and he didn't really have a lot of success in Texas, but he had enough that everyone remembered because the 300th win, 2 more no-hitters.
Yeah.
And it was in Seattle. I happened to be doing the game, and it was the first inning. They were filling up the Kingdome because it was going to be Nolan Ryan goodbyes last, and he didn't get through the first inning. And he didn't get through it because that ulnar collateral ligament snapped, and it had been frayed for years. Now, there's a follow-up story to that. I don't remember if this is in the book. I think it is in the book, too. The next year, I'm doing a college game up at TCU, and his son had transferred to TCU, and he was a pitcher. And Nolan had volunteered to be a non-paid pitching coach. And he's out there throwing batting practice. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, his ulnar collateral ligament broke last year, and what's going on here? And I talked to him after the game, and I said, well, you were throwing batting practice, and you were throwing it pretty good. And he says, did you have surgery? I mean, you couldn't have surgery. No, it just kind of healed up a little bit. And he said, I can throw in the high 80s now.
Oh, that's great.
He had a super arm. He really did. And that's why he lasted so long. That's why he lasted so long.
Wow. Man. So who do you think is the this is a tough question because I don't even know the answer. Who do you think's the greatest Astros legend of all time?
Well, if you look at what they did,
yeah,
Ryan would be if he'd been here the whole time. But his best years were in Anaheim, and his record-breaking years actually in the 5 years he was in Arlington because he had 2 more no-hitters and won his 300th game. So I'm not going to count him. I think as a pitcher, I'd probably put him there because he was here 9 years. And that was long enough.
Yeah.
But I still have to say Bagwell because of his overall abilities. And it's sad because a lot of people remember him at the end when he couldn't throw.
Yeah.
And but he was one of the best defensive first basemen in baseball before his probably poor tactics using some of the weights. And he admits that he was not necessarily following Gene Coleman's guidelines, and he may have used too much heavy weight, and
Wow.
because he actually, we used to kid him and say, "Why don't you just learn how to throw left-handed?" He said, "Wouldn't do any good. Both of them are shot," and that's basically doing too much. Too much. The weight was too heavy, and he was that wasn't conducive to helping him. But
Trying to get too big.
he would be my guy because he had a 400 plus on base percentage for his career.
Wow.
And there's one other Astro that had one, and he is the guy that has been terribly overlooked, Lance Berkman.
Yep.
Those are the only two Astros who had 400 plus on base percentages for their career, and they both hit just a smidgen under 300 for their career, 297, 298, somewhere in that neighborhood. And Berkman, of course, was totally overlooked. And Bagwell even says Berkman's the best hitter he was around.
Yeah. Berkman was
And so-
overlooked in the Hall of Fame voting, one and done.
Didn't get enough votes to last on the ballot after 1 year, and that's
Crazy.
wrong. That's wrong.
I can remember Brownie the first game. Then they finally sat when they finally sat Bagwell, and they turned to 3-6-3, and they said, "Boy, we haven't seen one of those in a long time." Remember that?
No, he couldn't. He could not throw. Big Gio was going out to take out all relay throws and getting cutoffs. He did because Bagwell really he had nothing. I was in the last spring training when he quit because he'd gone to the World Series in 2005 and all he could do was DH, and then he went to spring training the next year, but he had to give it up. He couldn't. That arm was just. He couldn't do anything, and the DH did not exist in the National League yet, and so it was over, and he gave it up in spring training, and it was sad because he couldn't throw. He couldn't throw at all. I mean, even infield practice, it would be lobbed underhand.
What do you think about the job he does as a broadcaster, helping out on the?
He's entertaining, and I think in small doses he's very good. But I think you wouldn't want him all the time.
Right, I agree.
That's what I think.
They get a little carried away, but there's a lot of guys that can do that in small doses. It's a tough job if you're going to be there every day because you have to do a lot more research. You're not just able to comment on what you see.
He definitely has a lot of knowledge.
Oh yeah,
Has a lot of
and he also and the older guys will be critical of some of the younger guys because a lot of guys in the younger generations are getting away with pure raw athletic ability, and they haven't really learned the game. They haven't learned maybe what pitches that this guy has that he may throw you with 2 strikes and where they may be, and that the secret is not your perfect swing and the coordination with no, the secret is right here. It's your hands and eyes. That's the secret. And that's the secret with hitting 2 strikes and not striking out. Hands and eyes. And you look at old instructional books, which I still have some. Ted Williams I have. And basically his instructions are as good as ever. And Ted, it became a big deal. You got to uppercut. Nowadays, you got to swing up because you got to hit the ball up. Well, Ted was teaching that 70 years ago or 80 years ago. It wasn't exactly what you think. His point was the pitcher is on a mound. He's up here. He's above you. So everything he throws is going to come at an angle like this. Everything. So you have to match that angle. So is that a slight? Yeah, that's slightly up. In other words, you're not swinging straight across. You have to swing slightly up. That's because that's where the pitch is coming from.
Yeah.
And that's really all it is. It's not, it's nothing more than that. Because if you're swinging straight, that pitch is going to come at a slight angle, and your point of contact to make contact is very small. If you're swinging a little bit up to match your point of contact is greater because you're on the same plane. And they're not all learning that. That's the problem. But Ted's stuff still flies, and the stuff he taught way back there. And but it's the hands and it's the hands and the eyes. And I think even if you remember back when Barry Bonds was all PED'd up, you couldn't get anything past him. And the reason was, okay, he was super strong. So when he did hit it, boom. But his swing was always on the same plane as the ball. There you go.
Yeah. That's
So
interesting. Hey, who do you mentioned some of the announcers. Who do you like listening to? Like which announcer do you say, boy, I really like listening to his calls?
I don't switch around that much. I mostly listen to Astro games. My only complaint with them is they do too many modern stats and you don't hear that as much on network games. And I like the fact that the network games don't do as much hit angle and switch. In other words, I have no problem with those, except I think I only want to hear them when they're exceptional.
Yeah.
Oh, that was 96 off the bat. Well, that's not exceptional. Don't worry about
Yeah.
it. If it's 110, tell me. Or if the pitch is, 105 or 104, tell me. But if it's 97, 90, I don't care. I also do like one thing Fox was doing on network games. If you'll notice, you could barely see the TV strike zone. It was almost faded in the background.
Right.
I wish they faded it all the way out, to tell you the truth. It's not
Yeah.
accurate, and it just causes more complaints. And when it's not there, you'll see some of the same pitches that when that's there, everyone's, oh, you missed that one, but nobody complains about them because they're not, you don't see it. I wish they'd phase it out. And if they do go to the robotic stuff, they won't have it, I don't think, because in the minor leagues, they don't have it. In other words, in the minor leagues where they're using the robotic umpires, first of all, they hardly televise any games, but when they do, there's no, that's the thing that costs money. They don't have it. They don't have that fake K zone or whatever it is. And so you're not going to notice it as much.
I read they're going to do some robotic umpires in the spring training this year.
Yeah, I think that's a beginning. That's a beginning of it. And the guys who've been pitching in the minor leagues are used to it. You can protest it if you, and there'll be some that, but the thing is, there won't be as many that are extremely off as there are with humans.
Yeah,
there'll be some that aren't right, maybe, but they're not going to be as far off as some human umpires get it. And I never have. That's just lack of concentration in my mind on every pitch because it shouldn't be that hard because you have to geometrically. The outside corner is the one where they miss a lot because they're set up on the inside, but it's not as hard to get that right as some umpires make it look because there's a geographical you can make it's going to have others, or even they could do a technique which they don't ever do of actually moving their head once they see where the pitch is coming. Once it comes on the way, move your head a little bit toward the outside corner, and you'll have a better direct line on it. But they don't do that. They're not taught to do that. They're taught to hold their head still. And but I have less problem with the baseball home plate umpires than I guess most people because, I mean, I can remember way back when I played, and there was a guy named Chet Thompson, and he was calling pitches up here, strikes all the time.
I can remember I spent a fair amount of time in Miami, and I can remember the 97 game when Eric Gregg called anything that was, if you want to see some bad umpiring, go watch that game.
Eric was really, really bad with balls and strikes, and I don't think it had anything to do with him being overweight. He just wasn't good.
He just wasn't any good.
And
he won the Angel Hernandez Award.
Well, who isn't any good either. And but another guy that was really popular in the American League. Now I've forgotten his name. He was a Texan, and he would do like this when he went up to plate. Basically, he was telling you, "This is my strike zone." It might be on the corner, it might not. I don't know why my light over there is flashing, but it's flashing. Weird. It's never done that before.
Dramatic effect.
It's
Yeah.
it's the signal that the show's almost over. No.
No, I think there's somebody downstairs that is doing that. We're still on the air, my dear.
We get no
I
visit
thought,
from the cat today. Remember last
I
time
thought,
the cat jumped up
yeah,
and was a
Cat
part
didn't
of the
visit.
show?
Cat
Yeah.
didn't
Hey,
visit.
quick question. If you were the Astros, if you ran the circus, what would you do in the off season?
Well, I'd still be looking for players that have value. I think, and I would also have a couple guys that have value to go the other direction that I wouldn't be afraid to maybe include in deals. But one of them that I would not be afraid to include in deal is McCormick, but he kind of screwed himself by not having a terrible year, and I don't
Yeah.
think he would be worth anything. I would like to see someone in center field who at least was as good defensively as the present center fielder, but a better hitter. I would like to see them solve the third base thing. And if it ends up having to be Shea Whitcomb, that's okay if he can play defense. And he
Right.
had a real bad game, one bad game.
Sure
I
did.
tell you, I think he's got promise because he doesn't strike out much, and that's really what they want to look for. Average was low, but let's see him play longer, and let's see if that continues.
Mm.
If they have to go that route, he can be another Pena at third base if they have to do it. First base, that would be also another position that if you can find the right guy, but I don't want some old retread that's had a down year because they did that once. Uh, but no, there'll be changes. Now, the pitching staff, you've got to have the guys that were hurt healthy and really healthy and ready to play. I wouldn't mind if Verlander came back with a contract that had a bunch of incentives, and obviously a lot lower base salary,
Right.
because he could be valuable in that rotation somewhere. But a lot of good's going to have to come through. Altuve's going to have another good year. So is Jordan. So is right field. So does whoever play well. Pena at shortstop. They're going to have to really rely on those guys and hope that the other guys can really fit in and help. And that's really the main thing. I think there'll probably be some changes in the middle of the bullpen. Presley might even be dealt, as we're hearing.
Yep.
But then you're still going to have to get somebody to replace him. So there'll be things going on. Not going to happen though immediately because the free agent scene has to start having some big guys signed.
Oh yeah.
Before the other guys will fall in line.
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't seen, I don't think, the Astros in this situation since, the late 2000s. It's kind of a mirror now. I don't think that Crane has the same loyalty that Drayton had to his older players, but there's a lot of read across between those two times.
Well,
I
there
think.
is, and I'll tell you what: if you all of a sudden see all of these guys, the veteran players, all of a sudden playing out contracts, consider Crane looking for a buyer, because that's exactly what Drayton did. As you remember, Drayton didn't sign anybody. Carlos Lee was the last guy, and after that, we used minor league guys, and the reason was simply because the team was for sale. And the new man didn't want to be burdened with a whole bunch of long-term contracts.
Yeah.
So Billy Wagner's gone. Two outfielders. Bourne's gone. They were just gone. They were traded instead of signing them to new contracts. Berkman, all those people. And so consequently, if you start seeing that, then the next thing to think is clubs for sale again.
Yeah.
He's held it for a while. You never know. I don't think he's ready for that. I think that he wants to see if they can't fill the pieces with the nucleus of what they've got and get back. Hey, they won the division again. I mean, we can't forget that. They had an off year, but they did win the division again. So they haven't fallen off to nothing. I think you fall off to nothing, and then you start seeing some major changes. I don't think we're there yet.
Mm-mm.
So my last legend question is this. Were you there when Billy Wagner was on the team? And also, why has it taken 10 years for someone with such great stats to he's finally going to get in this year? I totally believe that, but why 10 years?
I had a chapter on him in this book, which basically, when I originally wrote it, it was on him getting in last year. So I had to change the lead. He came close, and he's gonna. But
He did.
all the material's still there about Billy. Billy was still the best closer over a long period of time the Astros have ever had.
Yep.
And they've had some pretty good ones, actually. Some of them for shorter periods, but they've had some good ones. And but he's tops of all of them, and they kept it going with the Mets and the Phillies. And I thought because he did play with those other teams for a while, that would actually help his voting because you get more writers that remember him and knew him. But I think this year will be his year because if it's not, then he's in the same boat as Bregman and anybody else. They have to wait for the Veterans Committee to pick him up in 10 years, and that's not easy.
He'll
my last thing on Wagner, I think he absolutely has to get in. And when you look at Wagner compared to most relievers or most veteran players, their last 2 or 3 years are a downward decline. You talked about Pujols. Look at Wagner's last year, 7-2 with a 1.80 ERA or something like that. He was one of the few guys that told the game it was time to go rather than the game telling him it was time to go.
Well, and Wagner was the first of the real fireball short closers. One year, he threw over 144 pitches at 100 miles an hour. The next highest guy threw 14. That was in all of baseball. And that just shows how much he dominated. And then later he developed a little bit of an off-speed pitch, and control got better. No, he was, when he came in, it was over. And when they had that trio of Dotel, Lidge, and Wagner, the guys that finished up that first multi-pitcher no-hitter in Yankee Stadium back in the early 2000s, why nobody has been better other than maybe the Nasty Boys in the Big Red Machine days for a final three to close out a game than those guys. Mm-hmm. They were death. Got to the seventh inning, it was over. And that's what the Astros have to get back to, and they didn't have that quite this year.
They thought they did.
Well, they thought they did, and it didn't work out.
No.
They didn't work out. But they still, as I said, I'll go back. They won the division.
Yeah.
And there's no reason they shouldn't have beaten Detroit, but they didn't. And that's all you can do.
It's what happens in a short series.
And it was, of course, it also was fitting. They were both here in Houston, so they've had a lot of trouble with postseason games in Houston.
Oh, yeah.
So.
All right. Well, that's it. Mr.
Greg,
Lucas,
thanks for coming on.
Appreciate you coming on.
I enjoy talking every time you have a chance and to talk and plug Astro Legends, the second edition, available at Barnes & Nobles in many stores, but it can be ordered through any of them. And you can find it on online too. And
Amazon.
If you want to join the modern people and just order it from Amazon or wherever you can. It's worth for a great Christmas gift. I will say that, or for yourself as a Christmas gift.
Your other two books, the first edition and the other one you wrote, I saw in the team store in Corpus. So you could find it anywhere.
It's interesting. The Corpus and Round Rocks at the time, they were in their bookstores.
Yeah.
Now I've not had a deal with the Sugarland because Sugarland was not an Astro Farm Club, and this book came out too late for me to do that this year. But for some reason, the Astros themselves, I think it's because there are too many books written about them, but they don't carry books. No. I did a signing in Corpus. I did a signing in Round Rock. I even did a signing of all places in Indianapolis, and they had nothing to do with anything. But the publisher was there, so they got me up to Victory Field where the Indianapolis Indians were playing, and I did a visit. That's a good place too. You can check those places; they may have some of them, but you can still find the Biggio Bagwell book and the first edition of this in some Barnes and Nobles. They bring them back when interest in the team gets bigger. So let's hope the interest in the team is real hot all summer.
All right, Mr. Lucas, I think me and Wally both look forward to checking out this revised. I'm glad I didn't get the first one now because I'd rather read the revised edition with all these championships and the scandal part sounds interesting. But
some updates. There are updates. I agree. You should have had both, but that's okay.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm not a big reader. But anyway, we do appreciate you coming on as
Thanks
always.
so much, and happy
You're welcome to
Thanksgiving.
come back anytime you want. And as Wally said, happy Thanksgiving to you and everyone out there listening.
And the season that follows.
Yeah. And we'll see you next time on
Bye-bye.
Astros Baseball.